I will just introduce the moderator, Rob Powelson, from who's the president of the National Association of Water Companies. I think one thing that is certainly exciting about water is that it is bipartisan. It is something that affects everybody, and everyone wants to sort of come together to solve that. So I think there is no better group of individuals, there is no better moderator who can talk and walk us through that and leave us with a sense of both solutions and energy to go out there and solve it from the municipal and the political arena. So with that, I'll just pass it off to Rob, who will lead this next session for us. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Alex, and I want to take this opportunity to thank the team at Signs and Columbia Water Center for the work that you do on behalf of our industry. As mentioned, my name is Rob Powelson. Just for a quick footnote, it's Powelson. I've got broad shoulders, so I've been called worse as a recovering regulator. So I represent the National Association of Water Companies. We're a 129-year-old trade association. But just by way of reference, we're older than the National Football League. We're older than the American Gas Association. We're older than the Edison Electric Institute. We serve over 73 million customers across the U.S. And by way of background, this year, hot off the press, I believe it's our top 10 members spend close to $5.5 billion per annum. That number is up year over year on infrastructure across the 50 states. Our conversation here today is clearly a timely one. It's an opportunity for us as regulators. Some of us are going to be called recovering regulators. People who work on Capitol Hill, and the audience here. I mean, you all are serving in some leadership role in this industry. You recognize, as it was mentioned earlier, the challenges. I'm going to approach this, especially after lunch. It was supposed to be a debate. Personally, I'm debated out about water. I want to take a different approach. I want to have a fireside chat, and none of us are going to get roasted here. We're really going to roll up our sleeves, and we're going to spend our time here really addressing, and by the way, what an opportune time, because it's Climate Week here. And by the way, anybody getting around this city today, as Alex mentioned to me, use the rail system, the subway system, because Uber is, gridlock is alive and well today in New York City, probably over the next week. But I'm honored to have joining us on our panel today someone who I had the great opportunity, some of you I served with in my NAVRUC role as former NAVRUC president. But we're joined today, and I want to start with my good friend from Louisiana, Commissioner Skrmetta from the great state of Louisiana. And nearby, one of our newest commissioners, Commissioner Decatur Stamps from the great state of Mississippi. Thank you for your engagement. And also May Stevens, who's the CEO of the American Water Coalition. And we've had Rick Call, who is with me from NAWC, our Chief Operating Officer. We've worked closely with May. By way of background, she was an advisor to U.S. Senator Ben Cardin, who is leaving us. We're really one of the true thought leaders, along with tomorrow I'm in Dover, Delaware, with Senator Carper, two of the really go-to people on water policy. So, May, it's great to have you with us. And then my good friend from the great state of Missouri, a.k.a. the Show Me State, got a good football team this year once again, Commissioner Scott Rupp from the great state of Missouri. You know, I don't think anybody in this room, we can deny the fact that the headline risk of communities like Flint, Jackson, Baltimore, back in my home state, the Harrisburg and Pittsburgh water authorities, we recognize that as an industry and as key industry stakeholders that here in the U.S., and I think globally, we are facing a water quality issue and we are facing a water quantity issue. I think this is about local leadership, regional leadership, and clearly the problem is global in scale. And I think it's something we're all going to agree on here today, is that the solutions to solving the problem is going to come from thought leadership, bipartisan thought leadership, both in Washington, state capitals, public utility commissions, really working to address the failures in our water grid. And I think the first question I want to get at with this group is, look, we know we've had some good momentum. I commend President Biden and the Congress to pass the historic bipartisan infrastructure bill, which set aside $55 billion into our water infrastructure. And we also recognize, I know Seth Siegel might be with us, but if you identify the big issue in our industry is we can't sustain 51,145 drinking water systems here in the U.S. So I think, we've got to recognize that fragmentation is a very big issue, and it's statewide in some areas, it's regional in some areas, and it's rural in some areas. So I'm going to start with, I don't think consumers understand it, because I think consumers want safe, reliable, affordable service. But I think if we don't address the funding issue and the fragmentation issue, we're maybe doomed to fail, but we're going to be positive here. So Commissioner Skrmetta, I want to get your thoughts. You come from a state that's growing. You have a state that has rural interest. And how do you balance that issue of taking these distressed systems and really getting them to what I call a safe haven?
Well, I think first off, you have to recognize that, if it was an easy decision, we wouldn't have to make the decision. It would just happen. So we have to focus on making sure that we approach the success of the correction of the problem. Our biggest problem in Louisiana is we have numerous thousands of small water systems that were predominantly created by developers, and they were just slapped together and then walked away from. So they haven't approached a rate increase or a correction of equipment, in some cases, for 30 years. And so they'll find themselves in a position where they are, as we've heard before today, they get fined, but they just pass the fines through. The fines are not an issue for them. But we get to a point where we have to look to what the consumer expects. They expect clean drinking water. It's the only utility, as we all know, that our citizens ingest, and that they are deserving of clean drinking water. And so it sometimes is a hard decision to do rate increases, but they're necessary. And we have to just buckle down and do it in a way which is competitive. A lot of people don't realize that, we can go in and give small rate increases that don't accomplish the job completely. But when we look at states like us with Mississippi, with Commissioner Stamps, Louisiana, Texas, Arkansas, and this cluster of states, we actually have to compete for capital predominantly from New York. We have to compete in a way which provides returns on equity that are comparable to the other states. We have to compete in a way which provides value for the lenders to make sure that they get the money back that they're putting into the system. So, it's a difficult decision sometimes, but we have to move forward on this in order to protect the consumer. We regulate the private systems. We have basically 3 different systems in Louisiana. The municipals, we have what we call water districts, which are not regulated, only regulated by our Department of Environmental Quality. But as far as what we do, we take concerned and direct action about correcting it. The municipals, as we've heard today, a lot of times the cities, it's the last thing they worry about. They can always get to the end where there's a collapse and they'll raise taxes, and they'll create it at a much higher expense. But we are in a position to where critical action has to take place.
It's so funny you bring up the whole notion of the elected body running a water authority. I said I never met a mayor who got reelected to say I invested in water infrastructure and your rates went up. At the end of the day, people, obviously they want, and this is what's happened, this deferred maintenance to what you alluded to has caused this chronic failure. And now comes the day of accountability where public utility commissions are at the forefront of it. And Scott, I want to use your experience because Missouri was a state, and when you were chairman and your engagement at the NARUC Water Committee, you saw a lot of this in your state, these failing systems, and how do we get them to, again, this kind of safe harbor where either they, we'll say, we put them on the 12-step program to get better, right? We build that capacity, highly unlikely, by the way, as we know, or we bring in an investor-owned utility. And in some cases, it's been municipal on municipal. There are good municipal authorities in this country that have good safety and engineering cultures to run these assets. But from your perspective in Missouri, and by the way, you probably still have some of the battle scars from those cases, but your perspectives on how, as a commissioner, when you're managing this electric grid, the gas grid, you might even had to regulate Uber like me back in the day, but your perspective and how your colleagues could come together, again, Republicans, Democrats, say, we got a problem solve here, because if we don't, we're going to have a public health crisis.
Yeah, it starts with you got to have like a vision of where you want to go. If you're a regulator and you just take every rate case and you look at the rate case and you don't realize when all these decisions are made that you're actually creating policy through rate making, you have to understand where do I want to go. And so in Missouri, we had a lot of these struggling water systems. So the first problem is you had to find them. I mean, people would call the commission, and they would say, oh, I'm in this little HOA, and we have this water system, and our staff would go, prank call, you don't want to talk to us, and hang it up, because if you talk to us, you're setting in motion a whole thing that you have no idea what was out there. So sometimes they would just be like, seriously, okay, you really don't want to talk to us because what's going to come through the pipeline of regulatory is nothing like you've ever seen. But sometimes they came to us and they're failing. Most of the time we find out of them from DNR. They said there's a failing system, so you have to find them. Then the second thing is you have to create a policy in your state of how to deal with them. So obviously we looked at the big water companies. American Water Company is a huge company in our state. And so we tried to incentivize them through our rate-making process to buy these small systems and bring them into the fold. We were trying to get to a one-size state tariff for all water. Now, we ended up with two because St. Louis was such a unique area. But when I first got on the commission, it was multiple different jurisdictions. And the more we started to consolidate the rates, it gave them the incentive of, I can take this water place that's losing money, I'm not really going to ever get my money back on it, and I can fold it in and I can spread the cost off. And that worked for a while. But they weren't designed to do that, and they just didn't do a good job with some of them, and then they only kind of cherry-picked the ones they thought that were the easiest. So really the problem was never being solved until an entrepreneur had an idea because he read the rules, and I thought it was fascinating in the last session with the CEOs. The guy from Greece is talking about how he wanted a regulator so that everybody in the investment community would know the rules of how they're going to get their money back. And so he had an entrepreneur that read the rules and figured out, it's like, well, if I do this and I do this, they have to give me the money. And he came forth and he said, hey, here's a bunch of systems, this is what I'm going to do. And, he was treated like crap. I mean, he was, capitalist person trying to take advantage of this. It was like, no, we're trying to solve this problem. And luckily, we approved it. And now they have, 900 systems across the country, and they have figured out a way to economically fix these small systems, but it took, us kind of creating, some different rate structures. I mean, you're sitting 14% return on equity and stuff that you never would have seen anywhere else, and it was really hard to do, but you had to have a policy of, this is where we want to go. I can get us there through unique rate making rather than just looking at each little case. That's what we did, and it ended up being a huge success story we've already heard about from our previous panel.
And obviously, Missouri seeing a lot of growth, and our water utilities are playing a key role. I know Central States is here, and a growth state for them. May, I want to shift gears. I'm not going to let you off the hot seat here. You spent a lot of time on Capitol Hill. Obviously, no good deed goes unpunished on Capitol Hill these days. I wish we got back. The good news is we got a bipartisan infrastructure bill passed, $55 billion monies for lead service line replacement, PFAS. Looking ahead, I don't want to be Debbie Downer, but I don't know if we're going to have another bipartisan infrastructure bill. But your thoughts on the bipartisan infrastructure bill and how it serves as a catalyst for water infrastructure development over the next decade.
Exactly. Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be here, everyone. It's good to see you all. So I want to start by just sort of framing this up, right? $55 billion in water infrastructure investment. It's the largest ever investment in the history of the United States in water infrastructure. The largest ever in the history of the country, right? So we should be very, very excited about this. Now, normal, sort of the conventional wisdom is that we're going to need more than $1 trillion just to get our water systems up to the state of good repair, right? That doesn't account for PFAS and climate change and population growth and all of the things that we see coming just to get us up to a state of good repair. But so obviously 55 billion, you guys are the math whiz here, not me, but I know that 55 billion is nowhere close to $1 trillion. But that's kind of why we're here, right? We're here to rethink water. We're here to rethink the way that we, the way that we think about how we can fund things and how we can do things and do it in a better way. I will say that part of the reason why that $1 trillion number is so high right now is because over the last 40 years, the amount of money that the federal government invested in water infrastructure and how they invested it in water infrastructure decreased dramatically. So in the late 70s, the federal government was paying about 60% of all of the investment that was going into water. It was coming from the federal government, and it was grants. Today, it's less than 5%, not including the sort of one-time investment in the bipartisan infrastructure law. But now it's less than 5%. So that means that 95% of the money that's being invested in water infrastructure is essentially coming from people like you and me and companies that are just paying our water bills, right? So it's really a much different system than it used to be. And so that's part of the reason why we are seeing over the last 40 years a lot of infrastructure decline without a lot of investment, because there's not a lot of investment happening, right? But Bill's injection of funding is really important because we see in not just in the water sector, but in every sector, that when the federal government sort of invests in a new technology or an industry, or it doesn't even have to be new, but just if they're going all in on a thing, then private sector investment also follows, right? So we're going to see, sort of multiples of that, and that's why it would be really great if we could have another bipartisan infrastructure law to keep that momentum going. Now, I think people think that Washington is sort of broken and that it's sort of exactly like what you see on Fox News or on MSNBC, but I am here to tell you it is not like that in the water space. It's frankly not like that once the cameras are off either, because it's a reality TV show. But from my experience, water infrastructure is extremely bipartisan. So bipartisan infrastructure law says it in the name, right? Can't be more clear than that. But I wrote for Senator Cardin, I was the lead staffer to write and negotiate the 2016 water bill. If you can't remember back which one that was the one that addressed the Flint crisis. It passed 97-2. It was billions of dollars of infrastructure investment in that bill. I also wrote and negotiated the 2018 bill. That one passed 99-1. Again, billions of dollars of infrastructure investment in that bill as well. So you don't really see vote counts like that on bills, typically on other issues, but in the water sector, it really is bipartisan. So there is hope, but remains to be seen.
I'm going to come back with another Washington policy question, but our good friend from the great state of Mississippi, and by the way, Ole Miss looks pretty good this year as well. As you know, Commissioner, a tragic event happened in a community, the state capital of all places. 25,000 cases of bottled water had to be delivered to a community that did not trust what was coming out of their tap. And I wish I had the diagram, because this wasn't just an isolated event. This has been decades of system failures where a community that has a poverty rate, 20% of the population lives below the federal poverty level. And by the way, water molecules do not discriminate. People deserve safe, reliable, affordable service. And I look at the work that my organization did to go into Jackson and talk about to Governor Tate Reeves and the legislature about driving accountability, not just in Jackson, but across the state, where water systems would be required to submit an asset optimization plan, a cybersecurity plan, be testing their fire hydrants, updating their billing systems and their rates and tariffs. Pretty common sense things for a world-class utility to have. And you've been a lead voice on governance. So I'm going to turn that over to you because you're so spot on with the fact that this was a colossal failure in governance. So your perspectives, you're a new commissioner, you know the Jackson community. I don't think we're out of the woods yet. I really don't. I commend the EPA and the work that they've done to kind of triage this, but there's still a lot of moving parts to that infrastructure equation.
Well, first, thank you for allowing me to be on this panel and the organizers and funders of this talk today. Jackson, Mississippi, I served as, first off, my comments will be brief because I'm a retired Marine, so I just kind of get to the point on
Semper Fi.
So I served 8 years on the Jackson City Council. I served one term in the legislature, now I'm in the Public Service Commission, and it's given me a unique perspective in all of this. I have 451 family members that live in the city of Jackson. So when it comes to the decision-making process, it's personal for me. My father, my sister, everybody lives there. And Jackson and many other of our utilities are suffering from the number one issue that we have, is weak leadership. Weak and ineffective leadership that makes decisions based on profits versus making investments in your public works department so that you can maintain your system, making just good decisions is part of the major problems. We had a $90 million Siemens investment that was made in the city of Jackson when it should have been putting the same $90 million into the distribution system, because 40% of the water that's produced in the city of Jackson water treatment plant is lost in the distribution system. So there's a layered list of issues going on, not just in Jackson, but across the country. And hopefully we can start to make better decisions. And I just reach out to every citizen and I can tell, elect leaders that you need, not ones that you like. We need leaders stepping forward that have the appropriate courage to make decisions, because some of the decisions are a little painful now, but they will be catastrophic if they aren't made now for our future.
Yeah, it's well said. I think there's an old adage, General Schwarzkopf once said, problems that aren't dealt with lead to other problems. And it's so true in our water grid. May Congress, again, we're giving some platitudes to Congress today. And during the pandemic, one of the, I call it, great outcomes for our industry, both the public and private systems in the country, was emergency funding for a low-income household water assistance program. For anybody who's familiar, the electric and gas sector have had a very successful program known as LIHEAP, the Low-Income Household Energy Assistance Program. It's been around for over 45 years in this country. It's well-funded. And Congress, to their credit, recognized during the pandemic we had customers who, obviously lost their jobs, needed an assistance, and Congress allocated appropriately dollars to this program. And May, I know we're in a dogfight right now. You've been at the forefront of this, NAWC, AWWA, many of the water groups, NARUC, NASUCA. I'm using all these acronyms. I better footnote them. But we're all working in a bipartisan way, collective clout, unified voice, that we need permanent funding for the LIWAP program. I'm going to ask you your perspective. What's the vibe right now to move this forward?
Yeah, well, so one, I would just commend you on those acronyms, because I don't think I could have done LIHEAP off the top of my head. I just know it as LIHEAP, so very good. I'm impressed. But yeah, so I mean, I would like to take just one step back, because I want everybody in the room to sort of really internalize what this means. Okay, so imagine that if every utility in the US got paid in full every month for every drop of water that went out, right? That every person was able to pay on time and in full. And then imagine what that would do to the quality of water, the reliability of water, the ability to upgrade systems and deal with PFAS and deal with climate change and resiliency. deal with cybersecurity, which I think we'll chat about in a minute, right? Imagine if you could actually charge the true cost of water and that everybody be paid on time and in full. This would make it so that that's true, right? So that would mean that anybody who's thinking about investing in a water utility, then your investment is now really, really safe, right? Because now there's a safety net underneath it. It also means that everybody who gets water from any of these utilities has safe, reliable water, which we just said is really the only thing that people want, right? So that was the sort of problem that we wanted to address. I also, Senator Cardin, as you guys will see on this panel, Senator Cardin is the leader on water infrastructure. I just sort of followed along and then did what he told me to do. So I also wrote the first ever low-income assistance program in the water sector for the senator. He's a great boss. And so that was really the problem that we were trying to address. And we were so lucky that during the pandemic, people realized that there was this public health crisis. You couldn't turn off people's water because there was a public health threat, right? Like, you just were not going to be able to do that. And frankly, there are a lot of people, and I'm one of them, that think that we should probably get into a system where we don't have to shut off people's water, right? That's the other basis for this, right? Is if you care about not shutting off people's water, this would solve that problem, right? Just banning shutoffs doesn't do anything, right? So actually making sure that the utilities made whole. So the issue that we are facing now is the funding from during the pandemic has run out. It was a huge success. All the money, went out the door. We needed a lot more money than we got, and now we're waiting for future funding. But the funding that went out the door was sort of a emergency program. It was run through the LIHEAP office, and so it was run in a way that was just the design to just get the money out the door as fast as possible and help as many people as we could. There is a program at the EPA that EPA is doing a study to sort of. It's not really a study, it's more like a design, right, of like how we would design this program at EPA, where we would make sure that, the utilities like Jackson that are, having, some of the worst Safe Drinking Water Act violations, Clean Water Act violations, the people, the utilities that have, highest rates of poverty in their, in their service areas, that they're sort of prioritized to get this money first, or they have a lot of lead service lines or whatever it is, right? And so the program at EPA also takes into account, I know we will talk about the difference between, a very large utility being, having thousands of people working for them, and very, very small utilities that, sometimes very small utilities have less than one full-time person, sometimes just one volunteer, and that's it, right? If you're a volunteer and you're running the whole water utility, you're not also going applying for low-income assistance to EPA or HHS or anywhere else, right? You're just not going to be able to do that because you're barely keeping the thing going. So we want to make sure that we're designing a program that works for everyone, that works for all utilities, and we make sure that we're doing it in the right way. But this program, we just found out yesterday, the report has made it. I know you're all going to be bored by this, but the program has made it from EPA and it's gone to OMB. That's the final check before it gets published. So it's great news, even though it's a snooze fest. So good. Bureaucracy at its best. Yes.
And I want to add, because I'm going to ask each of our commissioners, I mean, you in your individual states, I mean, LIHEAP has been a very impactful program, whether it's Mississippi Power, Entergy, I got to name a utility in Missouri, help me. Give me one. Central Water States, yes. Where's Josiah? Central Water States, good shout out. And my fear is, and I'm going to put this out there, is that groups like AGA and EEI are kind of like, well, we like what we have, and that's great, and we like what they have, but we need permanent funding too to address the affordability, because there are people that pay a water bill and a wastewater bill. So I'd like to get your perspectives. I mean, you guys were all on the front line during COVID. You did a lot of remarkable things to keep utility service alive and well during a very difficult time. And you heard from customers about people who lost their jobs in the hospitality industry, manufacturing, you name it, because of business interruptions and shutdowns. and how important this program was. I mean, in my home state of Pennsylvania, we had something like a 97% utilization rate of those funds. Remarkable. By the way, you can't say that about LIHEAP. Dirty little secret. We'll stay on script. Just making sure everybody's paying attention here. So, Commissioner Skrmetta, in your state, I mean, the impact that this had, your perspective on and how it's been impactful to your consumers.
Well, Louisiana is largely listed along with Mississippi as one of the lowest income states on average in the country. And, LIHEAP plays an important part in, a proportionate element of our population. And that those funds are important for people to be able to meet their utility bills, and it stabilizes the entire electric system. And so the water assistance program is valuable too. There's no doubt about it. There does have to be renewal of LIHEAP as well, because LIHEAP usually gets cleaned out at certain parts of the year, and so we have to come back. So these are things that the federal delegations have to constantly go back and refuel. But what it does do, as much as May says, it provides for stabilization to ensure that there's not large gaps in percentages. Certain states have higher percentages of demand on these programs than others, and that it also puts the systems, whether it's electric or whether it's water or whatever it is, that it puts them in greater potential of harm or lack of response to, fixing systems because it doesn't have the money to do so.
Well, I couldn't agree more with your point. Rearages aren't good for anybody.
Right.
As we know, utilities can write off bad debt. Guess who pays for that? The good paying customer. So that's not good, sustainable for a utility. It's not good for the other ratepayers. And, to your point, I think customers, you can imagine a scenario, by the way, I don't want to be a policy wonk here, but just for a moment, imagine a one-stop shop application. Just throwing out some common sense here, ladies and gentlemen. A one-stop shop, here it is, I'm eligible, I'm under the 150% of federal poverty level, and I'm going to sign up for LIHEAP and LIWAP. It's one application. Sorry for the thought of the day here, but we'll leave that for another day.
Well, I would add one thing, is that the Louisiana Commission, when COVID kicked off, after 30 days, we put a ban on cutoffs, on power, on water, on everything. But we also recognized that it could not go on because there were good people that needed it and there were bad people who were taking advantage of it. And so we figured out very quickly that we didn't go past, I think it was 3, maybe 4 months, where we shut it off. And we told people that they had to get back on the program because there was a lot of people thought when we did the shutoffs that they never had to make it up, that these were all arrearage payments then. And so we went into a extended time period for approximately 9 months, I believe, where they could pay back the 4 months over a spread out cost period over the year. But there were, good actors and bad actors in that time frame, and so we have to be very cautious about these programs and how we use it. People who qualify for LIHEAP and for other programs like that are the ones who deserve to have these programs. Everybody else, they just have to, be cautious about how we deal with these. But I'm like you, is if one program takes care of one thing and one program takes care of another thing, why do we have this sort of bureaucracy to have 2 programs when one would take care of it?
Well, we're going to save that for the cocktail hour. We'll solve that. Well, get some congressional. May will write up some legislation for us. Scott, your perspectives, again, your state was impacted by COVID, and obviously Congress, again, another bipartisan, didn't get into any partisan rancor on funding this, or providing emergency funding for this program. By the way, we've had great success on Capitol Hill. I know Rick Hall has done a number of meetings with our members and other groups that are involved in our coalition for permanent funding for LIWAP. But your state and how you approached it, I mean, you were there when COVID hit and you managed through it. Your thoughts on permanent funding for LIWAP?
This is where I'd like to point out that I am a former commissioner, and I have been unburdened by what has been, so I can say what I like and say what I think. Thank you. Thank you for all of the work for LIHEAP. That is awesome. And for the water, and it's a great program. But it doesn't solve anything. if you help somebody with their bill, they're probably going to need help with their bill next month. They're going to need help with their bill next year. And we saw this on the electric and the gas side. It's the same thing. It's a great program. It serves a wonderful need, but we got to look at these things from a different perspective. You know, I'm a big fan of, you know, the PAYS program, Pay As You Save, or PAYS program, where you take the dollars and you go in and you retrofit the home. You make sure there's no leaky pipes. You put the insulation on there to keep the heating bill down. You put in insulation for the windows. You put in extras and stuff like that, because it will lower the cost of that bill for the long term. And if you look at these from a different perspective of trying to use the same dollars to have a longer term effect, then maybe you can get as many people that don't need to have the low-income programs, or at least long-term. You got to have them both, but really trying to approach it from a different perspective of a long-term value change versus, you know, just taking care of a Band-Aid for 1 year. So that's what we tried to do in the state of Missouri, is focus on some of those longer term while fully funding LIHEAP, and use with our community partners and NECACs and our community action agencies, which are so important to finding the people that need the help. But we got to look at it from a different perspective if we're going to have long-term growth.
Can I just really quickly, for clarification, I'm glad you made that point, because that is exactly right, that like we can't just have people having, you know, really leaky systems or leaks in their pipes, and then they're just, you know, water is going down the drain or you know, just into the house, and then you know, and then they're paying these higher bills. It's much more sustainable to put in more water efficient appliances. The program, the future program, accounts for that and allows for it, so that's great. And the other thing that the future program does is that it doesn't compete with EI and AGA, because as much as I love the water sector, we don't have the political oomph that the energy sector does in Washington, and so it doesn't compete with them for the funding. So that's good, then everybody's happy, and we still all get the things that we want without making very powerful people upset. So just two quick clarifications.
Yeah, good point. I think to Scott's point, you know, weatherization programs have worked. We recognize energy efficiency programs have worked. So it's not, who's not to say this, you know, my only pet peeve is on the efficiency side. Why does the electric utility get the credit for the low flow shower head when that's actually a piece of water infrastructure? Just food for thought.
You know, but it's also, it's just not sexy. I mean, we always would
How
joke.
do we make water
well, we would
sexy
always
again?
joke, you got to eat your energy efficiency vegetables before you can have your renewable energy dessert. And that's what everybody wants to run out and get all the fancy things. And it's like, I could be sitting there talking about, you know, water infrastructure, and it's like, you know, the ADHD character from Up. It's like, ooh, renewable energy, and then boom, you've lost them, and they're off chasing the dollars and chasing everything over there. And, you know, water isn't sexy, and so it doesn't get that renewable. Energy efficiency isn't sexy, but it has to be what we have to go after, you know, if we're really going to be driving this stuff long term, rather than just chasing the latest shiny thing.
Yeah, I think that's a great segue, because I think at this conference a few years ago, and now I'm really showing that I am a water geek, Tom Rooney articulated this multi-dimensional policy challenge. So we have the infrastructure problem around pipes, meter sets. We have the economics problem around water policy, which some would say it's broken. And then we have the disjointed public policy quandary around water. And solving that problem, or that Rubik's Cube, is what I guess holds us back at times on maybe adopting sensible solutions to issues like fragmentation, affordability, sustainable water infrastructure investment. But going to that bigger, that multi-dimensional economics of water, the policy of water, the infrastructure of water, I'm gonna open it up here. Your perspectives on that. I mean, that you can't solve the problem if you're not addressing it through that lens. That is so fundamental to this issue. I mean, think about it. There's 3,200 electric distribution companies in this country. There's 1,000 gas LDCs, and then there's us, 51,145, according to Seth Siegel, and I always quote Seth. 51, and 15,000 drinking water systems. And by the way, 85% of our U.S. water grid is municipally owned. Complete reversal on the electric and gas side. So I'm going to tee that up. I don't know if it's a softball. I'm very happy right now. The Phillies won the NL East title last night. They had to get out of New York.
It's almost October. So, no, well, if you look at what you just said, it's not separate variables, it's an equation, right, for me. All of it comes together under one look, right? Because when I look at this, I'm trying to go under the adage I told you one time before that God made water free, but he forgot to lay the pipes, right? So this is all about getting it from the ground to the consumer and all points in between. And that means how to pay for it, how to design it, how to put it into play, how to handle it from into the house, how to get it out of the house, how to keep it out of sensitive estuaries, where do we go with the water? All of it becomes a complex analysis of one recipe, right? For me, it's everything. And that means that's the answer to me. Electricity is the same problem. It's, you generate, you transmit, and you distribute. It's the same thing. The same thing right now with natural gas. We're constantly reevaluating our gas pipeline system and having to renew gas pipelines because they wear out. And it's like building roads. You get to the end of the road, and you go back and you start all over again because that pipeline that you started on 5-6 years ago might need to have something redone again. So you look at this and don't look at it in the sense of it as a simple separate component. It all has to be judged on a critical mass of how we do this. And it all starts with, and it's kind of sad to say, but it's all about the money to pay for all of it and how we do this. Now, I started off talking about my little water companies coming in, some of them not for 30 years. And we put in programs where we had telling these companies, come in every 3 years and get a CPI adjustment. And I've changed it from CPI to PPI adjustments because it made more sense because what's in the index variable, right? And they still won't come in because a lot of these folks don't keep books properly. It's a lot like the towing industry. We regulate non-consensual towing. And those guys, as some of the people who might have been at our last meeting, they don't care about anything, right? So, but they don't keep books. They don't keep a lot of things except stack cars in a junkyard, right? But when we get down to that with small water companies, they need to be in a position to where if they're so small and they're not coming in, that they need to be in a position to consolidate. That's the real solution on the smallest ones. And consolidating small water companies that are non-performers. I've got one right now that I'm working, because we do not have receivership authority under the commission in Louisiana. The receivership authority is under our Department of Environmental Quality. I'm going to our legislature next spring to get receivership authority because they look at receivership authority as they're a poor performer. We have a new system in Louisiana of grading water companies, the A, B, C, D, and F. They will not apply a receiver if they're getting, unless they're getting D and F grades. Well, I think most everybody in Louisiana got a B or a couple of A's, B's, but they're not getting the D's and the F's when they deserve to get D's and F's. There's a couple of them they're getting it. So we're actually had a very successful call with one of the deputy secretaries of our of Department of Health, which regulates water. And they are agreeing with me that they need to expand what are the qualifications for getting a D? What are the qualifications for getting an F? Because is it not having a backup generator when we have power outages to keep the water pressure up so they don't have to have boil water notices? How many of those take place before you get an F? So all of these things come together in this hodgepodge of a recipe to make sure this works. Because like I said, it's not the one thing, it's the equation. And like you said, it's not sexy, but I can't tell you about the difference between the sex appeal of electricity and water, but water never killed me.
So I not mind me jumping in. It's just, so you said it's an equation in which I agree, but it's like, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And I mean, now it's everything is PFAS, PFAS, PFAS. Oh my gosh. A couple years ago, we couldn't even, had the technology to even find that small of an amount. But now that we can find it, I mean, come on, regulators are going to regulate, and we better regulate it. And, EPA, well, we got to find this. But we still got people in my state that have E. coli in the water. I mean, and that, shows up a lot easier on a microscope than the PFAS and stuff. So it's like, what is the problem we're trying to solve? What are we throwing the money at? What's the latest fad? And, it's an 80-20 rule. You got, with all the Clean Water Act and everything that we have done in the last years, we solved 80% of the problem, for 20% of the money. And now to get that last 20% of all this other stuff we got to get out of the water, it's going to cost 80% of the money. It's going to be expensive. But I'm sitting here looking back in my state going, but I still got problems that haven't been fixed from the first time. So how do we incentivize people, through our rate making, through our return on equity and everything that we can set so that they, don't get distracted by the shiny thing. And, you got EPA breathing down your neck. I understand all that. But got to go and just and fix, what is still a problem before we just kind of gloss over it because maybe it's not in my community or it's, it's just not something that I see every day.
Yeah, well said. And Commissioner Stamps, like your perspective, in Mississippi, I think you have less than 3 million people living in the state. You have rural communities. You have urban centers. Your thoughts on driving this compliance narrative, where I love the idea of the report card or the J.D. Power ranking, but you have data. What do you do to stress? We do it in the banking system, by the way. I think we had that little thing happen here back in 2008. Everybody remember that?
Epstein?
And we did things like Dodd-Frank, Sarbanes-Oxley. It's almost like we need that for the water industry to get. By the way, Commissioner, are we doing grade inflation down there in Louisiana?
Yeah, I was going to say it sounds like Lake Wobegon, where all the children are above average.
Or grade
nervous.
deflation.
Commissioner.
One thing, we have competing capital interests, competing interests. You have the bottled water industry. You have the water companies like that come in and buy struggling water systems. You got municipal systems. But they're competing. The bottled water industry, no one even pays attention to a $1 increase on a case of water, but try to pass a $2 rate increase for a local community. And they're buying 4 or 5 cases a week, themselves. And, not any of this water we've had in the hallway out here. A lot of the bottled water industry is municipal water. So we have several competing interests when it comes to capitalism inside the water space. And then also inside of the public works departments, we got to put public works back to work. That's the cheapest, most affordable way to maintain a water system is having public employees do it. Because when you have to contract everything out, many of those times, those contractors don't live in those communities. So you have people descend on your community, fix your system, and then local communities aren't allowed to retire or be employed. So you end up spending that money that you would be spending on your water system because your crime is through the roof, because you don't have those low-level jobs that your local municipality has had over the last 50 or 60 years to offer to the citizens. So we have to take a different look at how we approach this. We have to put public works back to work. We have to elect leaders that we need versus the ones that we like. And we have to make real investments from the federal government. That $800 million that the federal government talked about giving to the city of Jackson, well, that money is still not arrived. That money is still in an EPA loophole that the city can access. The Jackson Water contractors who were given leadership over it can access it. And they're raising the rates on the people who couldn't afford it in the first place. So we have to make sure that we do things in Washington, D.C. that hit the ground, not just float in the air, but it actually hits the ground and it's actually written in an actionable way. So I believe, all those things need to happen and to include bringing local leaders to the national level and see, can we execute this in a reasonable time frame? Because we cannot fix what we won't face and execute appropriately.
I'm so glad you brought up this whole dichotomy associated with bottled water non-regulation. $5 per gallon, the average person in my neighborhood, I wouldn't understand that. but you can produce water at a penny a gallon, and we've lost that trust of what's coming out of our taps. And that's sad commentary because, May, you alluded to it. The federal commitment to water infrastructure in this country, starting back to the Eisenhower administration, we built a national interstate highway system, an interstate pipeline system. We saw the migration of inner cities to create suburban locations, and all this got funded in a way that it worked. And now, I think, again, I chalk a little bit it up to deferred maintenance, inability to do long-range planning, to Commissioner Skrmetta's point about, making sure, rankings matter, you're held accountable. I said to someone once, we would never run, think about 3 Mile Island, and I'm from Pennsylvania. Think about where the nuclear industry in this country has come after 3 Mile Island. How many incidents after 3 Mile Island have happened here in the U.S.? Anybody want to take a guess? Zero. Why? Because after TMI, the nuclear industry, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission drove a narrative with Congress that this would never happen again. And guess what? The compliance is here, and if you can't meet the compliance, you're not going to be a nuclear operator. That's what we need in the water industry. Agree or disagree?
I mean, I will say that I think that you make a very good point about the nuclear industry for sure. I think that the climate folks, is it working? Oh, sorry. I think that the climate folks have learned recently with their success with the Inflation Reduction Act, as compared to the 2008 cap and trade failure, right? Is that carrots work better than sticks, right? And so you're in a situation where you're looking at you're comparing the nuclear energy industry, which is by and large private companies, right? And then you're comparing it to municipal water systems, right, that are run as like nonprofit, just parts of the city, right? So it's like hard to sort of put a lot of sticks on the Department of Public Works for the local, Poughkeepsie town, right? And so I think that that's really the problem. So I think for the water sector, I think what's really good in Washington, is really helpful in Washington, is more carrots and less sticks, I think are easier to get past. So the carrots, I would say though, are, these are not really difficult things to think of. If two utilities want to work together because one of them's struggling and one of them's doing really well, the one that's doing really well, if they start working together, they can be liable for whatever the struggling water system does. Would it make sense to incentivize the one that is doing really well to help, to incentivize the helper by saying, look, you're not going to be liable. The struggling system will still be liable, so that people who are, poisoned by their water will still have some recourse, but the helpers aren't getting punished for helping, right? There's a disincentive for utilities to work together to help each other. Also, access to capital is the other thing, right? If we can reduce the cost of capital for small utilities that want to work together, that want to merge, right, voluntarily, right? Nobody's forcing anybody, to do this stuff, but if we can lower the cost of capital for them specifically, we can incentivize them to merge. We don't have to get to the sticks. We already have a lot of sticks in this sector. We have a lot of regulations on water already. We need to think more about the carrots.
Cut the carrots into sticks.
Exactly. Little baby carrots. Be great.
Well, we'll close on this note. There's a company called Central States Water. During the Jackson water crisis, Memorial Day weekend, was ready to send a crew to provide meaningful mutual assistance to triage that situation, and we're told to turn around. We've got to fix that problem. This is not an us versus them. This is about an industry coming together, problem solving, providing mutual assistance, whether it's cybersecurity, when you have a system failure, that we can all work together and break down those silos. And I think we could probably do another 2 hours, but Alex is right over my shoulder here, and he's saying, I'm up next, and it's 2 o'clock. I want to thank our panelists. You've flown into New York City, trained in. I just want to thank you for your time here today. Really good conversation, and appreciate your insights.
Thank you.